Hey guys, this is Nicole Van Tassel with I Explore Science, and I've been getting a lot of questions. This is actually from a question from somebody who has this unit, and anyway, the questions have been about like adapting resources or leveling resources, differentiating all of that. So I want to answer her question, and I also thought it was a good opportunity to kind of share an example of an anchor experience that your students are like engaging with a phenomenon or how I might present it or whatever. But more than that, like how I might adapt or change this activity if I was concerned about um, like my students becoming overwhelmed, if I had to move to, so in her situation, had to move to distance learning and is not sure and doesn't want to overwhelm her students there. So I'm going to share that with you. So this is part of the chemical kitchen unit. And in this activity, it was really designed as it's part of an anchor experience. So it's part of an experience that is designed to spark the questions that will segue students into learning throughout the unit. And anchor experiences, I really like to use. You can even set them up as like formative assessments in the end. You might want to, give your students, and you probably should give your students a different phenomenon for like a full summative assessment if you really want to understand what they've learned. However, when you create this initial phenomenon, or when you engage your students with this initial phenomenon at the beginning of the unit, you can really use that as a formative assessment at the end of the unit because you're continually coming back to it throughout your storyline. And then it's kind of like at the end of the unit, they are coming back and like maybe completing the task or addressing it. So, anyway, we'll talk about how that might play out here. So, in this activity, students are they're on the board of I can't remember exactly, but they are like on the school, yeah, they're on the school board, and they have received this petition from parents that says like ban high fructose corn syrup, and we want to remove all of it from our snack and our lunch items, and everything should just be pure cane sugar. So the food should be sweetened with pure cane sugar, not everything. Anyway, so they say we want like real food on our students' plates, blah blah blah. All right, so they get that petition, and then the parents have attached a number of resources for the school board to review. Now, the task is not actually like answering parents at this point. However, you could absolutely have students respond or craft a response to parents as a formative assessment at the end of the unit, or even a full assessment at the end of the unit. But in this part of the unit, our goal is for students to start wondering and asking questions. So the focus here is, you can see that they're on the school board. The focus is on determining what do I need to know to respond, to be able to respond to parents in a educated, knowledgeable way. So it's really about understanding, what is it that I don't know about this issue, what do I need to know in order to like respond to parents. So I mean, it's literally said having students think about, what questions do I need to answer in this unit in order to understand this? And that's a really good way to engage your students with a phenomenon, because then they're crafting the questions that your unit is going to answer, and they are identifying like, I need to know this question first in order to get that. So it's not just general wondering. We're like moving a step beyond just asking any question to really trying to think of like, what questions do I need to know to explain this and to understand this? And that's also how you're really segueing, your unit and your storyline. Okay, so that was a summary of the activity. So what do you do if you need to like adapt this, or if you're concerned, okay, are my students going to be overwhelmed with this? So first of all, this teacher, like, it's so good that they recognized my students might be overwhelmed with this. How do I chunk it out? Or how do I change it? That was one of my tips. But how do I change it? How do I adapt it? So the first thing is, if you suspect that your students are going to be overwhelmed in any way, like, make the changes that you need to make. Give them the supports they need to be successful. I think there's obviously a balance between too much support. Like, oftentimes we do too much support where we are just like giving them the answer or telling them or confirming the answer that they come up with or whatever. And we don't want to do that, but we also want them to be successful in their struggle. So the supports we're going to talk about here are not so much giving the answer, but changing the task a little bit so that your students are still struggling through it. They're still completing the purpose of it, but you're not just giving them the answer. You're not just giving them the questions. You're still asking them to complete that task. It's just in a modified fashion. So the first thing that you need to do is really understand, what is your purpose here? Like, what do you want them to walk away with at the end of this, if it's an exploration, this lesson, or what do you want them to be asking questions about through this? Like, what is this segueing into? Because really this anchor experience, it's tied to like a bigger unit. And so it could segue into asking questions about, about the like atoms and molecules and chemical compositions. It could flow into this idea of chemical reactions and like how things are changing. It's not necessarily set up to be as focused on like chemical reactions, the other part of the anchor experience where students are actually like examining like baking is more focused on that one. But this could for sure, because this is definitely set up to lead students into understanding synthetic materials, or starting to think about, not understanding, but starting to think about natural versus synthetic materials. So the questions then could become like into chemical reactions, like how did that happen? So I guess actually it is, because we look at how these different sugars are formed here. So you want to know exactly what your purpose. So is your purpose to, which specific questions do you really want your students to answer? Maybe it's all of them. If it's all of them, then I would encourage you to, and you need to adjust it. Then you're going to probably tweak a little bit of each component. But if it's like very specifically, I'm focusing on synthetic materials, then, or I want them to ask questions about like synthetic materials, or I want them to ask questions about molecules specifically, then that's where you want to go. And also, like if you've already done an activity where they've already generated questions about something else, like the chemical reactions component or the atoms and molecules component, then maybe you're like, well, they already did generate those questions, so I don't need to do another activity to get them asking those questions. And so you can focus this activity in the other direction. But either way, you want to know exactly like what is the big idea that I want them to walk away with, like the core idea, or in this case, what are like the core questions that I want them to come up with? Where do I want this to lead to? And that's going to determine how you then adapt this assignment. So the first thing I would say is just chunking things out. I found when I was teaching, I was teaching ELA at the time, and I had students that would just not pick up a pencil. No matter what, I could not get them to write anything. However, after talking with an academic coach that I was working with at the time, she had mentioned that, some of these students were English language learners, or I don't know if they were still identified. I can't remember if they were still identified as that or not, but they were very hesitant and very nervous to write. It was difficult for them, and it was overwhelming and scary, but they were capable of it. This group in particular, they were fully capable of it, but it was just like a willingness. That's why they wanted to pick up the pencil. So she suggested that I, instead of asking them to write like a paragraph on like lined paper, we literally broke it down into boxes. So it was like sentence 1, and it was just in a little box. And it was like, this is your introduction sentence or whatever. And then there were 3 boxes for like 3 pieces of supporting evidence or 3 ideas or whatever. And they had to write in a complete sentence, but it was in a box instead of on lined paper. And as silly as that sounds, like that made a huge difference. And they started writing. Like we would pick up the pencil and we'd be like, okay, we're gonna write our first sentence. Let's do the first sentence. Okay, now we need to find like an idea in the text that supports this or whatever it was, or write our idea of how this supports it. And they would write the second sentence. So chunking it out is a great way to do anything. So and to provide that scaffolding that actually doesn't change the assignment at all, because they're still doing all of it. They're just doing it in bite-sized pieces that feels less overwhelming, because it's all about our students' perception. Okay, so for this one, your first part, I would just start with the petition. So not even do not show them any of the resources, do not show them anything else. It's just the petition. And they have their, your student workbook here. And these materials have been digitized. I can't remember if I've uploaded the new ones to TPT or not. And the digital versions are available in the student workbooks. Digital versions of the student workbooks are available in the Spark subscription. But anyway, if you have if you have the TPT version, just go download it again, and there should be a link. It'll look all the same, but there's a link that will in the teacher guide that will take you to the digital version. Anyway, so I would first give them like the workbook, and we're doing this part. And it's your choice. Do we want to do this together? Do we want to do it in breakout rooms? But I would go through, like, read the petition together and read the task. Well, I'll probably read the task, then go read the petition, then come back here. And there's two parts to this task. So one part is evaluating the claims that the parents are making. And then the second part is questions. And I would break that into two separate, like, little mini chunks of time. So the first part, you go through the task, you read the petition, maybe together, maybe whatever, however you want to do it. And then you come and you talk about, okay, so now we need to figure out, like, what claims are the parents making? And this is a great time to introduce, like, what is a claim? It's this idea that's being put forward. So let's go back through this petition and let's identify, like, what are the claims our students or these parents are making. We should not sacrifice our students' health. That's kind of a, pure foods that are not chemically modified in the lab. So they're saying, like, pure foods are not chemically modified in the lab. They're saying that high fructose corn syrup increases the student's risk of blah, 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 all those things. They're proposing a replacement with pure cane sugar. So if your students are at the level where they can kind of also infer, like, what does that mean? What are they saying about pure cane sugar? They're saying that pure cane sugar is not connected with obesity, weight gain, diabetes, and general inflammation. And I don't know that that's true. So that is like another kind of claim that's like subtext. So they might also, that they deserve wholesome, pure foods. So if we sweeten it with pure cane sugar, it means it's wholesome. Like, again, not necessarily, but your students may or may not be able to read between those lines, and it's okay if they cannot. That's not really that important. The big claim that they're making is that high fructose corn syrup does all these bad things to your health, and that pure cane sugar does not. So go ahead and go through the claims, and then you can talk about the claims. And at this point, it's good for students to start asking questions. There's a lot of different strategies you can use for asking questions. Basically, we're kind of doing a notice and wonder, like, notice what are they saying? Let's look at the claims. Let's figure out what they are. Let's notice what they're saying about it. And then let's generate questions. There's the Right Question Institute's protocol for asking questions, where you are basically setting a timer. You're writing down every single question that's possible that you can think of. You're not judging those questions. You're not evaluating those questions. And then in, like, next levels, you might realize, like, this one's not relevant. This one's not going to help me find my answer. This one is a yes or no question, not really anything we can dig into. And that's like the second stage, is evaluating. Anyway, so having your students ask questions at this point. If you're virtual, this is like a great opportunity to break into, you can either have them do it independently. You could break into, like, breakout rooms. You could also use something like Jamboard so that students are throwing ideas up. I'm going to actually be doing like some trainings on, in my email next week. I was kind of drafting what I was planning on sending about tips to help students ask questions. So I don't want to spend too much time on this right now, but basically giving them this chance to ask questions after they have kind of looked at the claim. And this won't take very long because there's not that much here. We just want to give them some time to look at this right now and to think about, like, well, what questions do I have? And there's a couple reflection questions that just, again, gets them thinking. Like, so what do you already know about sugar and high fructose corn syrup? What's the initial reaction to this petition? Now is where the evidence comes in, and this is where your students might get overwhelmed. So we chunked that first part. That should be pretty, like, easy going at that point. But now it's like, okay, now there's a lot of sources here. What do we do? Okay, so for the first thing is just, like, eliminate what you don't need. And there's I have another activity on like the rock strata and fossil record, and there's a lot of resources that are in there. If you're adapting it, eliminate some of those. They don't necessarily need all of those resources, but I'm extra and I like to provide a bunch of them. But you want to think back to what was your purpose, and what resources aren't supporting that purpose. So if your focus is this idea of, like, natural and synthetic material, so you're working toward that standard, you want them to ask questions about that, then you don't need to have this this section here about the molecular structures of common simple sugars, because it doesn't even show anything about like synthetic. So they have no comparison. So that's it's point like it's not that important. So I would eliminate that. If your focus is on like atoms and molecules, then you definitely want to keep this one because you want students to notice like, hey, look, these chemical formulas are the same. Oh wait, they're not the same. But you want them to notice like these elements are the same and they're just arranged differently. I think there's one that's the same. Maybe not. Maybe I didn't put one. This one's the same. Sucrose and lactose, but they're arranged differently, and so that is what makes them different. So you want them to notice like, oh, they are the same numbers, like there's the same number of atoms, but like they are different sugars. Like, how is that possible? You want them to ask questions about that. And that leads into eventually them understanding that it's all about the arrangement of these atoms and how the molecules are joined and all those things. Okay, so that would obviously be something you would want to keep in there if you are moving toward like atoms and molecules and those ideas. But you might be able to then eliminate these cards that talk about like the synthetic. Like if you're not getting into chemical reactions or synthetic and natural materials, then you don't need this stuff. Just get rid of it. Also along those lines, there's a lot of sweetener like production cards. This shows you how these things are made. If you're not doing natural and synthetic materials or chemical reactions, then who cares how they're made? Who cares that they are modified in the lab and so on and so forth. So you can for sure like eliminate those. And even if you want them to go into that, maybe they still don't need all of them. Like maybe they don't need to have maple syrup and honey and white sugar and brown sugar and high fructose corn syrup and agave nectar and so on. Like, you know what I mean? So break it apart. If you're in a classroom and you and another option too is you can always jigsaw it. So maybe not every student gets all of those, but like students get different combinations of them and they can share their ideas and share their thinking on it. So that's an option as well. So eliminate what you can, just cut those things out. Along those lines, there's these like this chart. Again, if you're not getting into the sweeteners, you don't need that part. And the headline cards. So first of all, I linked to all the original articles, but that doesn't mean your students have to go visit them. You could simply look at the headlines and say the teacher, they ripped the headlines out of the newspaper or whatever. So what can we learn from the headlines? Because again, it's not about like saying, I agree with this. It's not about saying, at this point in the anchor, it's not about really even fully understanding like what the argument in the article is. It's just about asking questions. So if you avoid the hidden dangers of high fructose corn syrup, you don't need to know what those hidden dangers are right now. You could just like literally ask like, well, why are they hidden dangers? Why, like, what are the dangers? How is high fructose corn syrup any different than any other type of like maple syrup or whatever? How come they're saying high fructose corn syrup and not just like all sugars? Like, you know what I mean? They're just asking questions. Along those lines, there's some headlines that are like way more intense. So high fructose corn syrup induces metabolic dysregulation and altered dopamine signaling. Like eliminate that one if you think your students are going to see that and have no idea what any of those words are. Okay, just throw that one out. But it is provided there because in addition, while we have students that may struggle, we also have students that can use that challenge. So maybe that's a card that you give to a student. Again, they don't necessarily need to go to the article. They're probably not going to be able to understand it, but they can maybe they recognize some of those words, or maybe they have had, if you're doing like higher levels, like upper level high school students, maybe they can use that or whatever. So like pick and choose the resources you want. So that's the first thing, like eliminate that kind of stuff. But we also want to, for myself on simple heading. Yes. Focus on the headline. Okay. So we can also still like jigsaw even this part, or I'm not jigsaw, like chunk even this part. So maybe you give them like in some classes, I could give them a collection of 4 or 5 resources like this, like a couple headline cards, a couple of these like chemical formulas, these cards or whatever. And they could just they would know to sort through them one at a time. It's broken down in the workbook, like one at a time, a space, here's the notes and here's my questions and wonderings, each resource at a time. And they would be totally fine doing that, and it would not put them over the edge. But if you have a group that if I give them too much stuff, they're just going to shut down, don't give it to them all at once. Put it up on the screen, or send, if you're put it on their desk, or if you're digital, put it on the screen, or send it to them to their screens, one resource at a time, and set a timer and give them, okay, you have 3 minutes to kind of look over this, or form whatever, to look over this, jot down some notes. Okay, now I'm going to set another timer, and I want you to write down your, 2 minutes to talk about, maybe you break them into groups or something like that. 2 minutes to talk about your questions and your wonderings, or you're doing it as a whole class, however you're doing it. And then go through each of the resources that you've selected with that in mind. And then you can come back together as a class, and you're really going to compile look at all of the questions, look at all of the wonderings, and identify which ones are the most important. And this could be where you're also then, if you're digital or distance learning or whatever, you can take, hey, this was all the students' workbooks. Now let's put it on a class Jamboard so we can see all of our really good ideas and all of our questions, and we can evaluate these questions. And we can maybe set aside the ones that are not going to help us get to our goal of understanding this parent's petition, or we can, and identify which ones are most important, which ones should come first. And there's questions in the class discussion that kind of give you, it connects back to the other anchor experience, but it also asks students to start ranking those questions and start thinking about the questions, so that what's the most important thing to investigate? What do I need to answer first so I can move on to be able to respond to these parents' arguments and claims and all of that in the future. And again, they're not responding to it. They're just looking at the questions at this point. But so that's one way. You could also, when instead of showing all of the students every resource, you could again jigsaw it and give students different resources, and then have them share. So then you're going through and saying okay, so we looked at the how things are made cards, and these are some of the observations that we made about them, and these are some of the questions we had about them. And again, just still compiling those questions somewhere so that students can see as a class, these were all of our questions and all of our wonderings. So a Jamboard or something like that is a great tool for that. But you're breaking it up. So students are not necessarily even going through all of these different components. Maybe they're going through, one from each. So they're going through maybe one or two of these, or they're going through this part, or break it up however you would see fit. And can keep in mind that you want your students to be able to share out what they had observed and what they wondered. And then that even you could, if you're well, I want my students to see all of them, even if they maybe don't take the whole time to reflect on it, you could always okay, this group is up next. Here's the resource that they got. Can you share with us your notes and your wonderings? And then you're again compiling it as a class somewhere, your observations. Notes is really just observations, and questions and wonderings. So again, we're doing a notice and wonder kind of thing, but we're just calling it sometimes different words because sometimes notice and wonder feels, I don't know. There's nothing wrong with it. You should always repeat things because then students know so whatever you're calling it, call it that. But I don't know. When I like to, whatever. So you're essentially making observations and asking questions, because that's honestly the best way to generate questions, is taking the time to pause and observe and think. And that's when the wonderings come out, and the good ideas and the connections and all of that. We need more thinking space in our life. So anyway, so that's kind of how I would kind of break apart an anchor experience like this, and how I would adapt, honestly, any, even an exploration. First of all, identify the need to adapt it. Then figure out what is your big purpose with this activity, or what do you want your students to walk away asking or knowing. And then look at the resources. And even if it's an exploration, maybe it's not resources like this, but it's parts of the task. And maybe you can eliminate some of the evidence, or maybe you could eliminate a couple of the questions or even sections of the task that don't speak directly to your purpose. Because your purpose might be different than what it was designed for. You are the expert in your class. Your purpose for your students, your purpose for your curriculum, your school, whatever, you might have a slightly different focus than whatever resource you're working with. So identify what your purpose, what you want your students to walk away with out of this activity, and then kind of throw out the rest. And don't think that you have to do every single thing if it's not moving students toward your purpose. So this is how I would do it with an anchor experience, where there's kind of a number of different, or a number of pieces of the puzzle and how I might simplify that down. But yeah, so, I would, I'll probably do another video sometime showing how I might do this with an exploration. Because again, like how to level has been a big question I've gotten a lot lately. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. I hope this answered your question. I appreciate the teacher that sent this question in, and I hope this was helpful. And again, I know it's really long, but yeah, I will talk to you later. Have a good one.